that is suitable. And there's the announcement that the meeting is being recorded. So thank you. Just do let us know in the chat if there's any issues. And with that sort of out of the way, I'd like to introduce the team. So I'm going to invite the team to introduce themselves. Again, my name is Anne Delorme. I'm a fund director. My pronouns are she and her. Julia, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Falco. My pronouns are she and her. I'm the Senior Program Officer for the Act Together for Inclusion Fund, and I'm based on unceded Algonquin territory known as Ottawa.
Thank you. And Natalia, also part of the team at ACTIF.
Hello, everyone. My name is Natalia Sinuko. I'm the Junior Program Officer of ACTIF. And my pronouns are she and her, and I'm based in Montreal.
Fantastic. And William.
Hi, thanks. My name is William Hamilton. I'm the Senior Finance Officer for ACTIF. I have a background in accounting for nonprofit organizations, also in particular HIV/AIDS organizations. So I'm excited to work on this project. Thank you.
Great. So we'll just switch to the next slide and provide a brief introduction. I'm sure Julia will let me know if I've forgotten something, but I believe that it's on the slide. Sorry, Julia. So we're going to launch a quick poll before we provide too much of an introduction. And I know these webinars can be a little bit dry, so here's our effort to use technology to engage you. So here's the first poll. Please answer, where are you joining the webinar from? Just to the panelists can't vote. Just for people. I hope you can all see the poll. I'm getting nothing in the chat that things are difficult.
We have now 84% of people have voted. So one more second and I'm going to end the poll.
Thank you. Hey, fantastic. So 67% from North America. And then we do have people listening in from South America, Africa, Europe, and Asia. So thank you, those of you who are calling in from Asia. It must be midnight your time. That must be very difficult. So thanks for your commitment to ACTIF and your interest. So the second poll, we'd love to know, are you going to apply for this call for proposals? Perhaps you're just joining us out of general interest. So is it your plan to apply for this current call for proposals and submit your organizational profiles in the next few months? Fantastic. So 73% of you will be applying, and 5 of you on the fence, still on a maybe. So this is part of the objectives of this webinar, is to help provide more information to know if this call for proposals is for you, keeping in mind that it's the first of many call for proposals that will be coming from the Act Together for Inclusion Fund. And on that, we can go ahead and introduce a little bit more about the fund, and I think I'll pass it back to Doug.
Hi, everybody. So I'm going to say a couple of words about Dignity Network Canada, how this fund came to be. Some of you folks may know this history, but I know we have a very diverse group. And some folk may be hearing about Equitas and Dignity for the first time. So I will just tell you a little bit in about maybe 2 minutes. So Dignity Network is a coalition of about 46 organizations across the country who are interested in or working on LGBTIQ2 or SOGS human rights globally. And so currently I'm the only employee working for the network, and I've been active in the network since its inception as a volunteer since about, well, 2016. Our network does 3 things. The first thing we do is collective advocacy to the Government of Canada on encouraging a stronger and greater support for international LGBTIQ2 issues and human rights. 2, we're a space for sharing and learning for Canadian organizations and their partners involved in international SOGS work. and we call that a community of practice. Thirdly, we have a mandate to engage with general Canadian civil society and the public around increasing support for and awareness of international SOGS related human rights. So those last two items are actually very tied to what our involvement in this project. I'll say our network was very involved in the advocacy that led to the Canadian government increasing its support in this area. And this advocacy led directly to the creation of this particular fund, as well as some other funding initiatives that will be forthcoming from the Government of Canada in the next several months. Equitas is a member of Dignity Network Canada, and as a network, we endorsed their holding and administration of this new fund. And we're partnered with them now. We have a memorandum of understanding between the network and Equitas in developing the framework of the fund, working with them on the implementation. Our primary specific role relates to those last two parts of our mandate. So we are responsible for developing the community of practice for all the grantees and other groups in the country that do this work that might not be funded through ACTIF, but through other mechanisms. And we're also responsible for developing the communications and public engagement initiative that will be rolled out over the next 6 years related to the fund. So that's our role. And I want to welcome everybody to this conversation. It's a really exciting day for a lot of us who've been working towards this for 5 or 6 years. So glad you're here. Over to you, Anne.
Thanks, Doug. So just to reiterate, ACTIF is funded by Global Affairs Canada, and our goal is to advance the human rights of LGBTQI persons in countries in the Global South. And we're defining the Global South for the purposes of this fund, as specifically those that are eligible for overseas development assistance or official development assistance. Before I pass over the mic to Julia to jump into the nitty-gritty of our eligibility and the application form, I did want to take a moment to let you know about what principles are guiding the fund, and specifically this feminist and participatory approach that we're applying to how we ensure the good governance of the fund and how funding decisions are made. So you can read more about this on our website. There is more detail on this feminist and participatory approach. But basically, we're trying to shift the power of decision making, which is traditionally held by funders like government funders like Global Affairs Canada, but also foundations or family funders. Often they're held by the staff. And we want to shift that power to engage LGBTQ2 activists, both in the governance of the fund, which is our advisory committee, and also in the decisions around which projects will be funded, which is the project selection committee. So I encourage you to read more about that on our website. And we're here to answer any questions that you may have. And I think I'll cut short a little bit on the guiding principles because I see that I'm at the end of my time, but you can read more about our guiding principles in our call for proposals document. And with that, I pass it over to you, Julia, and I'm sure you'll fill in the blanks of anything important that I forgot. Thank you.
Great. So hi, everyone. Again, I'm Julia, and I'm going to be guiding us through the rest of the session. And as Anne said, some of the nitty-gritty details about this call for proposals. So to start with, ACTIF is welcoming projects from Canadian civil society organizations in partnership with organizations in the Global South that aim to advance the human rights of LGBTQ2I persons. Currently, we are welcoming projects that are between 12 and 36 months, and that have a total budget between 200,000 and 500,000 Canadian dollars. In terms of funding priorities, ACTIF's ultimate objective, as Anne said, is to increase the respect, protection, and fulfillment of human rights and socioeconomic outcomes for LGBTQ2I persons in the Global South. And so in order to contribute to this ultimate objective of the fund, ACTIF will fund projects that respond to 1 to 3 of our intermediate outcomes. There's a pretty long list of intermediate outcomes, and we have tried to be pretty broad so that organizations can use their own knowledge and expertise about the context to identify your priorities and situate them in one of these fairly broad intermediate objectives. So for the full list of those intermediate objectives, please see page 9 of our call for proposals document, which Natalia will share in the chat. I will also share that we are prioritizing projects that are presented by and focused on Two-Spirit, trans, and intersex organizations, as well as lesbian, bisexual, and queer women, because of the historical and current underfunding of these marginalized groups. So the last section that we have on this slide here is a summary of eligibility criteria. And on our next slide, I'm going to share a bit more about this in detail, as well as priority criteria as well. So we want to be very clear about this eligibility criteria so that organizations don't have to waste time applying for something only to find out that they are not even eligible for what this specific call is open for. So in order to be eligible for ACTIF funding under this first call for proposals, the lead Canadian partners must be a registered nonprofit organization in Canada. They must have been in operation for at least 1 year and have a mandate or board authorization to work internationally. And they also must have experience working on LGBTQ2I issues in Canada or internationally. And then the lead Southern organizations must be a registered organization in an ODA eligible country and must have been in operation for at least 1 year. And thank you for just sharing in the chat, Natalia, the ODA link. Natalia can also share for us the eligibility quiz. So taking this quiz will allow you to identify whether you are eligible. So in addition to this eligibility criteria, we have some priority criteria. So priority will be given to Canadian organizations that have experience working with Southern partners, and to Canadian organizations with significant representation, 75% plus, of LGBTQ2I staff in senior management and on the board. And priority will also be given to Southern organizations with that same significant representation. I see some questions coming in on the chat. Thank you for those. Feel free to keep them coming. And we will address questions at the end. So the application process will take place in 2 phases. Step 1 is an organizational profile, and step 2 is a more fulsome proposal. So the first deadline to mark in your calendars is Friday, March 12th, and that is the deadline for step 1, organizational profiles. So we are going to take a bit of time to dive in to the organizational profile so that everyone can feel a little bit more familiar and comfortable with what is being asked. We know often that application forms can feel or just be overwhelming or burdensome. And so we want to make sure that we're doing all that we can to support you to understand what we're asking for. So the organizational profiles can be submitted through SurveyMonkey. And I believe Natalia will share that SurveyMonkey link in the chat. And a Word document is also available so that you as potential applicants can view and prepare for all of the questions ahead of time before actually doing the submission on SurveyMonkey. So in the SurveyMonkey form, it will take you through different sections, whereas the Word document, you will be able to see all of the questions at one time. I am now going to ask Natalia to share her screen with us. Perfect, thank you. So we are going to do a quick run through of the organizational profiles using the Word document. Okay, so as you will see here on Natalia's screen, step 1 of the organizational profile provides some questions for us to get a basic understanding of your project. And you will note here we have put some of the questions into blue font because these are some of the questions where we're getting some feedback that these could be a bit clearer or people have some questions. So at the bottom of this page, you'll see how many Canadian organizations will be leading this project and how many Southern organizations will be leading this project. So we ask you to click the number of lead organizations. And based on the number of lead organizations that you have, you will be prompted to complete organizational profiles based on that number. So essentially, a profile will need to be completed for each Canadian and Southern lead organization. So then we ask some questions about your legal status and governance, as well as how we can find you, how we can contact you. And you'll see here a question in blue. Maybe perhaps Natalia, if you could zoom in a little bit. Perfect. We ask, does your organization have financial statements that detail revenues and expenses during the last fiscal year? So organizations may have different fiscal years, and we are in February right now. You'll be submitting organizational profiles in March. So we ask that you provide statements from your last fiscal year. So it doesn't matter what our fiscal year is at DNC or at Equitas, just that you provide statements from your last full fiscal year. And then we have some more of these questions, which will essentially be affirming your eligibility. In the next section, we ask about intersectionality and inclusion, and this is still for the Canadian organizations. So ACTIF prioritizes LGBTQ2I organizations. And so it is important for us to know whether you identify as such. So there are some questions here, and I think we may have gotten one in the chat about the 75% plus. We can definitely come to that in the question period. And then we have a couple more questions here about intersectionality and inclusion. So we know that LGBTQ2I communities are not homogeneous, and that there are power dynamics and interlocking systems of oppression that influence different groups within these communities, right? So we welcome you to share about the values and identities that inform your organization's leadership, as well as the values and identities that inform the work that you do. Now you'll notice here we also have a question about partnerships. So I will speak to this in a later slide. So just keep that in mind and we will come back to this. And then we come to the parts of the profiles for Southern partners. So essentially we're asking almost the identical information to understand who you are, how we can contact you. And for the case of Southern organizations who, are probably not working in Canadian dollars, we've been asked, how should Southern organizations provide their annual budget? And we have put here that this needs to be in Canadian dollars, but we're actually okay to adjust this and for you to just submit your annual budget in the local currency that you operate in. So this is a correction that we will be making just for simplicity and not having to worry about exchange rates. And then we are asking for the registration certificates of lead Southern organizations. So to clarify, lead Canadian and Southern organizations must be registered and be included in these organizational profiles. These registered organizations may act as fiscal sponsors and so can partner and share funding with local unregistered organizations. We know that this is a pretty significant issue. It's hard in many regions to be registered as an LGBTQ2I organization. So please keep that in mind. And then we've received a question asking if the copy of the registration certificate needs to be translated into English. Don't worry about that. We know that these are often kind of PDF documents. We'll see that they are official with signatures and etc. So don't worry about trying to translate those certificates. We have another question in blue here. Do you have a letter from both organizations outlining your commitment to the partnership and project? So the partnership letter should be developed and signed between the lead partners that are being presented in these profiles. So at this point, we don't need, if you have more organizations that are partnering, but that are perhaps unregistered and that aren't lead partners, we don't need this to be signed. And then we ask for some references. And you may be wondering, we filled out this whole application. Why are you asking us for references? So for Canadian organizations, we at Equitas and DNC have a pretty good sense of who most organizations are. And we have ways of learning about organizations, of course, based on their website. But we don't necessarily know or have a lot of information about the context that many Southern organizations may be working in. So we ask you to provide references from actors that can speak to the credibility of Southern organizations. They can be unregistered, they can be past donors that you may have worked with. We leave this pretty open and up to you to determine who would be a good fit. And then similarly to the Canadian organizations, we also ask Southern partners to share some information about their approach and experiences with intersectionality and inclusion. And that is the end. So thank you, Natalia, for guiding us through that. And I will share my screen again to bring us back to the slideshow. Okay. I believe my screen is being shared, but you never know sometimes. Okay, great. So that was kind of the walkthrough of the organizational profiles. I hope that that gives you a bit of a better sense in terms of what this looks like, what you can expect to prepare for, and maybe some answers to some of the questions that you had. As I mentioned during that walkthrough, I'm going to take a couple minutes to briefly speak to partnerships. As you saw in that Word document, there are a few questions about partnerships, and we ask for the letter. And this is because working in partnerships is really at the heart of ACTIF. And this is to build solidarity and reduce silos in how we work. So these partnerships will take many forms between and among movements and civil society in the Global South, as well as in Canada. And we know that power dynamics are inherent to grant making and also inherent to partnerships between Global South and Global North organizations and activists. So we are challenging ourselves at ACTIF and challenging you as potential applicants to consider not only the who in partnerships, but also the how and the why. So we ask ourselves and each other to reflect on what makes partnerships equitable, feminist, decolonial, anti-racist. I'm going to put a quote up on the screen and give you a moment to read it. So this quote is from a report called Creating Equitable South-North Partnerships that was recently launched, and there are some folks who also recorded YouTube video, which you can find. So Natalia, I believe, is going to put links with you. And this one is because this is a great resource that we encourage you to check out when thinking about some of these questions in terms of partnerships and how and why we do that. And so on this topic, I would encourage folks, if you feel so inclined, to share some quick ideas in terms of what actually makes partnerships decolonial, feminist, and anti-racist. I'm going to give everyone 60 seconds. If there's any kind of immediate ideas that come to mind, this is not a quiz. We will not be documenting your answers. This is just to get some ideas flowing.
So we're seeing some answers come in, being responsive to changing realities and to priorities that shift, which is fantastic.
Great. So I will just put some ideas up here and encourage folks to take a look at these and reflect on them. We know that a lot of you are probably doing this kind of thinking already. And thanks to those who have added your thoughts in the chat.
Someone also added horizontal management structures, which I think is a great point as well. So how we're responsive, and here an emphasis on trust, which is really fantastic to hear. Trusting communities to set their own priorities and develop partnerships based on those. Also for a message on for decolonial, see the comment of Kim about Global South needs to have references while Canadians don't. So we'll address, thanks, yeah, we'll address that in just a few moments. We're coming to the question period. I'm noting them down, so don't worry, they're not forgotten.
Great, thank you. So then to sum up here, we just also wanted to highlight the 4 kinds of attachments to remember to include in your organizational profiles. So the first that we talked about was the audited financial statements or attestation letter from the Canadian partner, the letter of support confirming the partnership and signed by the lead organizations, the registration certificate of lead Southern organizations, and a link to your organization's policy on preventing sexual exploitation and abuse, or however your organization frames that, if you have one. And lastly, I'm going to touch on some key dates. So following these 2 English and French orientation sessions, we have a bilingual question and answer session that's happening on March 9th. So we will be launching the registration information for that session shortly. And that's a few days before the call for proposals deadline, which is on March 12th. So if you have any kind of questions that are bubbling up or burning at the last minute, or if you're having technical issues with the SurveyMonkey, this will be a great opportunity for you to come by. There will be no presentation. It will be more of an organic meeting where folks can feel free to ask any questions. By April 1st, we hope to invite successful organizations to submit project proposals. So following a review for eligibility based on the profiles that you share, we will either share with you that the profiles were ineligible, or that we will invite you to submit proposals. And we hope to give you a fair amount of time to develop those proposals, and the deadline that we're looking at is May 14th. And by the end of June, we would like to communicate to applicants about the final decisions. So we are basing these timelines off of the volume of organizational profiles that we are anticipating to receive, and as well based off of some go-aheads from the donor Global Affairs Canada. So we are pretty confident in these, but there is a chance that they may shift slightly. So as Anne and Doug mentioned at the beginning, this is a new fund, and this is our first call for proposals. So we appreciate your patience as we work to make this as clear, accessible, and user-friendly as possible. And your questions and feedback are important to us, and also really helpful to help in kind of using our collective wisdom to make these call for proposals as as great as we can. So with that, we are going to now look at the questions that you have shared with us in the chat.
So I've noted some down, Julia. Why don't I read through the ones that I have so far, and maybe you can help direct who's best placed to answer them. So the first, not necessarily the first, but the first one I noted down, does the Southern organization need to be a nonprofit? So it needs to be registered, but does it need to be a nonprofit? Do you want me to field that?
Sure.
Okay, so the idea behind the fund is to fund civil society organizations in Canada and in the Global South. However, the reason that it's not explicit in the form is we realize that depending on what country your organization is registered in, there is some diversity on the categorizations. Sometimes it's called not a nonprofit, it's called a community organization. But we are definitely not interested in funding Google in this call for proposals, for example. So just hopefully that gives you enough clarity without us. We're always trying to be cognizant that we don't want to be so firm as to exclude in those areas where we're not obligated to be so firm. But understand that the objective is to fund civil society organizations, both in Canada and in the Global South. Julia, can we work with 2 or more countries?
Yes, definitely.
Great. So yeah, you could be a Canadian organization and you're intending to work in Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador, and you have partners, one for each country that will be leading that work there. It's important that each country where you are working, that you have a lead Southern. Julia, another question. What is LEAD?
Yes, so for the purposes of this application and call for proposals, the lead organization is the one that will be responsible for, in Canada at least, the lead organization will be responsible in terms of an agreement that will be signed between Equitas DNC, so ACTIF, and the Canadian lead organization, yourselves. And so the difference between lead organizations and non-lead organizations is this gives some flexibility for non-registered organizations to still access funds without being registered. And yeah, anything to add, Anne?
No, that's right. So under the way this fund is funded from Global Affairs Canada, it is because there's different funding that's been made available from the Canadian government. And maybe Doug can touch a little bit more on that. Doug, if I can shout out to you really quickly. But basically ACTIF is funded through the partnership spread. This actually answers some other questions about like, why is a Canadian organization needed? And isn't that in itself a colonial process where you're passing money through a Canadian organization to get to a Southern organization? And it's a really valid point, and I appreciate that it's been raised. The nature of this funding is that it's coming through the Canadian Partnerships Branch. So they fund traditionally Canadian organizations to partner with organizations in ODA eligible countries. So that is a constraint that we have in this funding, but it's also wherein lies the importance of the fund. As Doug explained, there's a group of organizations, including LGBTQI organizations, that came together that advocated the Canadian government to have funding. So what happened is that there was a number of organizations that were doing this work in Canada with their partners, but it was very difficult for them to reach any funding for it, specifically funding from Global Affairs Canada. In fact, they're perhaps getting funding from European funds. So there's this desire to see Canada step up and start funding this work that Canadian civil society organizations were doing in partnership with their partners. And there's advantages to having strong civil society in Canada that is working on these issues, that is knowledgeable about international LGBTQ2I human rights-based issues. It's important also that we're building solidarity between global movements, between movements north and south, and that's also part of the objectives within this fund. Doug, are you there? Do you want to talk a little bit about the other windows that might be able to address some of these other needs?
I'll just say very quickly, and that was a really good explanation of why the Canadian window. Thank you. So this is a part of a larger suite of additional programs that will be rolled out by the Government of Canada. This is the first major one to go out. The next initiative that will come out is a $15 million fund that will be managed by another part of GAC, that will, the geographic division in part, which will support regional networks and organizations directly in the Global South. We're at Dignity Network, we're doing a lot of advocacy to try and move that out quickly and get it moving, and also to work to see how it connects with these other windows. So to Georgina's question, I think, you know, we're very aware that this particular fund is focused on Canadian organizations, but we are advocating very strongly for more resources to go through different mechanisms to directly to international organizations on the ground. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Doug. And so that should also answer another question that I saw in the chat, which is like, do Southern organizations need Canadian partners? Yes. The idea that we don't want Canadian organizations applying to this fund without having collaborated on the conception and design of this project. So that's why we're asking for both profiles from the get-go to demonstrate the importance of the partnership. But it is a partnership that is required. So Southern organizations do need Canadian partners. And I also recognize that that's really difficult for this first call. If you don't already have a partnership in place, there'll be more calls for proposals going forward, and there'll be more time also leading up to those calls for proposals. So we'll be able to work with interested organizations in preparing for the next call, and also we'll be adjusting. We have a few tools in our tool belt, so we'll be adjusting to try and meet some of the gaps, all while recognizing that ACTIF cannot meet all the needs. It's an exciting amount of money, but it is still a modest fund. So just to be really specific, for ACTIF, you need to have a Canadian partner. The Global South organization cannot receive funding directly from ACTIF without a Canadian partner. All right, so I'm just going to move to the next question. Julia, maybe you could field this one. Do all members as part of the consortium need to meet eligibility? So for example, what if there's an organization that is neither based in Canada nor based in an ODA eligible country?
Yeah, so I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, only organizations, unfortunately, that are in ODA eligible countries or in Canada, if they're the Canadian partners, can be funded by ACTIF because of their requirements from Global Affairs Canada.
Okay, so if you were considering a consortium application between a Canadian organization, a French organization, and a Senegalese organization, it would not be possible for the French organization to be included because they are not ODA eligible. Julia, could you tell us a little bit about the difference, this next question, between eligibility and priority? Can you apply for funding if, for example, 75% of your board or your staff or your senior management is not LGBTQI people?
Yeah, so eligibility is kind of the basic requirements that are needed in order for you to be considered, right? So in order for you to submit an organizational profile that is successful, you will need to meet the eligibility requirements. The priority criteria are there to guide both you as potential applicants and the project selection committee to keep in mind why this fund was created and it being really by and primarily for our communities as LGBTQI folks. So I see a question that kind of relates to this. It says the eligibility quiz indicates that unless the board of directors has 75% representation, the applicant is not eligible. So there may be a technical issue with that question in our quiz. We can double check that. It means that, so for instance, if your board of directors like wasn't at that level of LGBTQI representation, then you would still be eligible, but you would not be in kind of the top priority category. And we have a more kind of fulsome evaluation table in the call for proposals if you want to see that. So thank you for that note, and we will check that in the quiz.
Great. So yeah, you can apply, though the point of this fund is to fund LGBTQI organizations. But it's also overall to fund advancing the human rights of LGBTQI people internationally, right? So there's a balance there. Can you apply? I'm gonna let Doug answer this one just to switch it up a little bit. Can you apply? Can you submit more than one proposal? Can your organization be involved in more than one proposal? You still there, Doug? You're on mute. Okay, I'll field it. Oh, you're there. Doug, I can hear you now.
Hang on, I'm just having some problems here.
Okay.
Go for it.
Okay. So the answer is that while you can submit more than one proposal, we're cognizant right now that it's not a tremendous amount of funding, and we are concerned if all the funding gets concentrated in one or a few organizations. So in an effort to ensure that the largest number of organizations can benefit from ACTIF, especially Canadian organizations, for now, we're only going to fund one project per organization. So whether you're lead or you're involved in another consortium in another way, one at a time. So once you've completed one project, you can apply again. We're open to revisiting this policy, absolutely. We will, in fact, not just we're open, but we'll be constantly revisiting this policy as we learn more at each call for proposals. But really, our number one concern right now is just making sure that it's come out like very loud and clear that money does get concentrated among certain organizations, and we don't want to reproduce those dynamics with ACTIF if we can avoid it. So the next question is, Julia, maybe you want to try this one. Is there a template for the partnership letter and what should it include?
Yeah, we don't have a template. You can actually see that we've provided little guidance on that. It doesn't need to be long. It doesn't need to be a PhD thesis. We essentially want to have a kind of a deeper understanding in terms of how long have you been collaborating for or working together with, or working together as partners, either formally or kind of informally. It would be helpful for us to know how you are approaching your partnership. So You'll recall that one of our questions asks about power dynamics and how you are addressing those. So if you would like to expand on that a little bit in the letter, that's an option. And we're looking to see that, you know, both organizations are have a clear understanding of the kind of, not what you're signing up for, but what you're applying for, and that you're committed to this. Anything to add there, Anne?
Yeah, and so it might be 2 organizations signing the letter, or if you're working in more than one country, it might be multiple organizations. In some cases, it might even be 2 Canadian organizations and Southern partners signing the letter. And the idea is, and this was raised by the advisory committee that reviewed this call for proposal documents, where one activist shared they discovered that a Northern organization had applied for funding and put their name down as a partner, and they had never been consulted. They didn't even know it was taking place. So we want to make sure that the Southern partner is a key player and not just knows what's going on. So there's, you know, they're highly involved in the conception of this project. That letter is there. If it becomes really problematic in terms of what to include in the letter, we can offer a template, but I don't think it's necessary. Really, just add a little bit of. I'm just noting the time, so I'm going to rapid fire go through a few. So other than the partnership letter, there's the question around references, which is a really great one. So, you know, we're talking about this equitable partnership and decolonial practices. And so why are we only asking the Southern organization for a reference letter? Why aren't we asking the Canadian organization for the reference letter? So you're right that there's things we ask of the Canadian organizations that we don't ask of the Southern organizations. For example, with Canadian organizations, because there's a bit more onus, more financial responsibility that will fall on the Canadian organizations because of the way Global Affairs Canada funding is structured. We're asking for financial statements, for example. Also, we have the advantage of working as our strategic partner with Dignity Network Canada. So to a degree, there's less of unknown entity if the Canadian organization is a member of Dignity Network Canada. However, the team has been discussing what happens if a Canadian organization comes forward and they're not members of Dignity Network Canada and they're not known. So at which point we will also ask for reference letters. But at this time, we didn't feel that it was necessary for all Canadian organizations. Whereas there's a large diversity of organizations in the Global South. And while we have a fantastic advisory committee of 10 with representation from different regions, and then the project selection committee as well, there'll be representation from different regions. There are a lot of countries within those regions, and we want to ensure, one, that we're funding truly credible actors within the LGBTQI community. And we have important due diligence to do around reducing the risks of fraud and sexual violence and other issues. So that's part of why we're asking for these questions, these references. And who should be a reference letter? I think Julia already answered that, but you know, I definitely someone that can speak to your work on LGBTQI human rights or socioeconomic outcomes. A funder is another good reference. So, since you have 2, you can choose a variety of actors. Another question was, we are registered recently. We've become an official organization quite recently, but we've actually been in operations for more than 1 year. And it's interesting, right? Because our strategic partner, Dignity Network Canada, is in a similar position. So that's fine. You're meeting both criteria. You are registered and you have been in operations for more than 1 year. I'm just realizing it's 1:01, and I don't know if more questions came in as I was like frantically answering all of those. Did I miss anything, Julia?
Yes, there are a few more. Our time has come to an end, but I have have kind of taken stock of all of the questions that are asked, and if there are any that we have not gotten to, we can follow up via email. So I think we will have to close it there. And
Can I just answer one more, just because I want to make sure that this was clear. So we explained that being an LGBTQ2I organization, right? So trying to make a difference perhaps between LGBTQ2I led versus LGBTQ2I serving versus maybe an NGO with a social justice mandate. The priority will be provided for LGBTQ2I led organizations, right? We're trying to ensure access to funding for actors that have not traditionally been able to access it, right? But you can still apply if you're not LGBTQ2I led. And your proposal will be assessed by the project selection committee with keeping both the eligibility and the priority criteria in mind. So one example is, yeah, there could be, for example, a Canadian organization that is a traditional NGO and that is partnering with a smaller Canadian Two-Spirit organization, for example. And they also have partners in Latin America. And together they apply for the fund. That is absolutely a valid type consortium that is applying for ACTIF. You will definitely be considered within that eligibility criteria. I hope that helps to clear that up. Matsunev, thank you for asking that last question. Is there a mechanism to ask questions before the webinar? And yes, Natalia Sinuko, which Julia kindly put the email address in the chat, is available to answer your questions. We've centralized it all with Natalia, who is going to be fantastic at getting back to all of you. So thank you. Sorry, Julia, go ahead.
Yeah. So I have taken note of, oh, I see one more question here. I know there's also a question about the budget, and so I think at this point we will take note of these and get in touch with some answers on these. We should have your emails, I believe, based on our registration list. If you don't hear from us within the next 48 hours, please feel free to get in touch with Natalia with the email there. And we will be sharing the information for that Q&A session on Tuesday, March 9th shortly. So with that, thank you all so much. Doug has also shared a comment in there. It's really wonderful to see everyone engaging and asking questions. We know that there are a lot of questions and there's a lot of interest out there. So we will do our best to get back to all of you if we didn't have a chance to discuss today. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, and take good care.
Thank you, everyone.